And I thought about it, and what I really came up with was um, I want the people that I care the most about to hear what I've kind of all the knowledge that I've accumulated over these 4 years. And so when I think about like the state of FCA right now, um, the current senior class is like probably a set of some of my best friends that I've just grown relationships with over the past like 4 years. And it's complemented by like a set of underclassmen that are like very excited to grow on the foundation that has been built of this group. So just want to give you guys something that you guys can hold on to this summer, and then hopefully can like carry on to in further semesters. So that's my why. And we'll get into my story. So grew up in a Christian household. And I became very involved in my youth group from a very young age. And I experienced the Holy Spirit for the first time in 8th grade, the summer before when I went to camp. And I decided I want to get baptized then there. I was like, dang, this Holy Spirit thing is so sick. So I decided I wanted to follow the Lord then. And that was great. Moving into high school, my youth group was great. I had a group of guys that were like my age, like 5 of them. And we hung out together. We all went to the same school, and like that was my best. That was my like best set of friends I've ever had. And we all believed, and we hung out all the time. And for my entire youth through high school, I thought like that was faith. I had my friends that we all said we were Christians, but that was kind of just it. So we engaged with the Lord occasionally, in like conversation. We talk about tough topics. We went to summer camp together, but there's really no evidence that the Lord like really changed our hearts. We were at our core still teenagers, right? We spoke like teenagers. We were tempted by the desires of the world like teenagers. The big thing for us was like getting into the best college, having the most like prestigious name on our resume, and we like idolized that as much as a human could. And so for most of my childhood, like I thought that was fellowship. So that brings me to where I came into Cornell as a freshman. I got to campus and almost immediately, probably like day 1 or 2, I got reached out to by this guy, Austin Cochran, and there's a couple of guys here that know that man. He's also on Zoom right now. Yeah, he invited me to a CG. So it was the cruise version of a Bible study. And it was in this group where I learned what like true fellowship actually looked like. I met some of my closest friends in that group, Bo, Lucas, the Yapugian brothers, and the Oge Ezequena, for those that know them. And it was a great experience overall because during our hangouts, particularly like outside of Bible study, I got to see what like seeking the Lord actually looked like through my friends. So like, for example, examples like Lucas and Bo, just the way I saw them interact with people, it seemed like seeking the Lord was like naturally ingrained in them. They like naturally wanted to, in their natural habits, glorify the Lord, and satisfy, his commands of us. And so that was a massive learning experience. I got to see like them have joy in the toughest of situations, the way they loved like just pure strangers, and the way they were patient and kind in all situations. And so over time, this fellowship pushed me to seek the Lord further myself, to surround myself with more Christ-seeking, brothers and sisters in Christ, and learn more about the Lord's commandments in true fellowship. So that trajectory kind of carried throughout sophomore and junior years. I continued on this track, sophomore time in fellowship, tried to learn as much as I could, and I went to Bible study, as much as possible, and I took frivolous notes. I have this blue notebook and I get a new one every year and I try to write as much as I can. And so as a result, I became I'll call it like book smart when it came to the Bible. Like I learned all these things. I learned how to answer the tough questions, like why do bad things happen to good people? I learned like what a Christ-centered relationship was. I learned new things like before I came into school, I guess I'd never read Romans, but in Romans 13, it talks about like submitting to governing authorities, which is just like obeying those in command. I didn't know that. So learned all these things through great fellowships like FCA Bible study. And I even begun to like understand what it meant to be saved truly. to like understand that you're a sinner, being willing to turn from it, understanding that Jesus is the only person or the only thing that can help you turn from your ways, and then allowing him to work in you. However, throughout this whole time, my faith felt very hollow. And so like I knew about the change that the Lord could bring to you, but I wasn't experiencing it. So there were like a lot of things like good grades and like the glory of like a prestigious job posting on my LinkedIn. That had an unbreakable grip on me. I was losing a battle of temptation pretty embarrassingly. That was crippling to the ministry that I was a part of. Yeah, at one point I was pursuing a girl that didn't want anything to do with Jesus at all, despite God calling us directly to be in equally yoked relationships. And I didn't glorify the Lord with my tongue. I swore at any instance of fear or anger or stress. I was a slave to the point where I physically got ill on a couple of occasions at the thought of like opening and reading my Bible. This is during like my sophomore and junior years of college. So yeah, I knew and preached all of these things because I learned it. But I was a total hypocrite. I was not changed by the Lord. So I was fake. I knew the worst part about it was like I knew it was right because I'd focused and taken so many notes. I knew it was right, and I was able to put on a facade because I knew what to say and I knew like how to act when I was in the right situation. But behind closed doors, when nobody was looking, I was not 100% committed to the Lord. I might have been 50, but it was not 100% committed to the Lord. And I knew in my heart I was not changed. This brings me to senior year. So senior year comes around, and one day in December 1st, it was a late night. And I was just sitting there, and at this point, like, yeah, I'd spent like a lot of my time here in fellowship. I grew into some leadership positions. I led 2 CGs in Crew, which is their Bible studies. I was leading a Bible study in FCA, and I was discipling a guy, Mark, through Crew. And I sat there on that December night, and I was like, what are we doing? Like, how can I be doing this and not do it? Like, how can I be saying this and not doing it myself? So at this point, okay, yeah. Yeah. And on top of that, like I had all my friends too, like many of which I'm sure even looked up to me, thought I was like a good Christian, but in my heart I knew I was not changed. So starting that night, I just decided to make a change, to build a personal relationship with the Lord, so that I could put him on the throne of my life, and not the world. I set one main goal for myself among a few others. The main goal was to just read my Bible every single day. It was Erica Diggs freshman year. The mom of one of our football players, one of my teammates came in and gave one analogy my freshman year that kind of stuck with me, that a relationship with the Lord is like almost like a relationship between like me and you, where I talk to you and you talk to me. And through those conversations, we become friends. And so she used the analogy of like, you talk to the Lord through prayer, and the Lord talks to you through the word. And so if I'm talking to Callie over here, if I'm just talking to Callie and I'm not even listening. She might be speaking back to me. I'm not even listening. Like, is that a relationship? No. So my main goal is to read my Bible every single day. And then among that, combat temptation through a personal relationship with the Lord, and then combat sloth as well, so laziness. And so I set up a system for myself to record how well I achieved each of these goals every day. And that was purely for reflection. So I could look back at the end of each month and say, hey, like I did this well, I did this not well, much like watching film, as a lot of you guys I'm sure do. So since that day in December, I've seen like immense improvement in all 3 of these areas: Devo life, temptation, and then glorifying the Lord through work. And more importantly, through this kind of push, the Lord has like fundamentally changed my heart and who I am as a human being. I no longer like wanted to spend time with my friends that like partied. I wanted to spend time with like my Christian friends. I wanted to drink less. I wanted to have like less I didn't want to have vulgar conversations anymore. And I slowly started winning those battles with temptation. The weight of the sin to me became a lot more, and the temptation to do it became a lot less. And ultimately, much like my friends from freshman year, I guess still friends now, but I felt like I naturally wanted to do these things to glorify the Lord in just how I act, right? It didn't come forced. I just naturally, it felt like the Lord like changed my heart. And I felt like I naturally wanted to do these things. So yeah, since then I've experienced peace unmatched by anything this earth provides. I've experienced joy, hanging out in fellowship. I've been like honestly laughing more, like simply. I've just been experiencing like a new life, it feels like. And so a verse or a section of the Bible that I think really characterizes this is John 15, which I'm sure a lot of you guys are familiar with. Jesus explains the analogy of the vine and the branches. And so verse 5 says, I'm the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. So yeah, this push to me was like a successful attempt to abide more in the vine. And as a result, like I've experienced fruits unmatched by anything on this planet. For those that may not know, the fruits referred to here are the fruit of the Spirit. So that goes love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. So like a nice comparison I was thinking about was like in football, right? You score a touchdown, you're freaking jumping, you're like the happiest you could ever be. But like someone living by the world might think that's joy. But the reality is that joy, like that lasts 30 seconds and then you're on to the next play. So the difference in the fruit you get, the joy you get from abiding in the vine is that this joy lasts. This is it's like you scored a touchdown and you have that feeling for eternity. So yeah, ultimately, like learning points, you can surround yourself with the best people, the best fellowship possible. I did that. You can learn, like you could push yourself to learn like everything possible. You could spend 1,000 hours in the Bible to learn as much about the Lord's commandments as you can. But the Lord ultimately won't work in you unless you pursue him individually, one-on-one. You could try really hard to be the best Christian you can. You could try your hardest to be the best Christian and follow all the Lord's commandments. But unless you make your own personal decision in your heart to follow him, like unless you make that decision, he's not going to follow you, or he's not going to come for you. So I stand here saying right now that the Lord is extremely real. I know that from my experience. He will fundamentally change you, and I can confidently say he will change like you guys as well if you guys just commit. So thank you guys.
Hey guys, I'm just want to introduce our next speaker. So our next speaker is someone who's very important to me. Just one of the best people I know. Someone I strive to be like every day of my life. It's a very integral part of my childhood, making me into the man I am today. I guess background, he graduated from Bowling Green, mathematics major, got his MBA at Case Western Reserve. He worked at Merrill Lynch as a financial advisor for 34 years. He's done sports ministry and coached soccer and basketball in France and all over Africa. He was one of the founding members of FCA in Cleveland, and he served as the Cleveland Browns chaplain and the chaplain for the visiting teams. So please help me in welcoming my grandfather, Dwight Short.
Thank you. That was great. That's the best he has ever done anything, but if I'd have known he was going to be that generous with his kind words, I would have asked him a long time ago to introduce me and do some stuff together. Thank you, Blair. Blair. Thank you, Ty. Blair's his dad. Reminds me a lot of his dad. He's growing up to be a lot like his dad. Even better. But you'll see his dad probably here tomorrow. Thank you so much for letting me come and share tonight. It's my pleasure to be able to tell all of you in this room that every one of you are an answer to prayer. You are such an answer to prayer because I have been praying for my grandson to have other believers surround him when he comes to Cornell. When he leaves home, I can't have any control over him, neither can his parents, neither can all the people who tried to give him all the guidance in the world. But having people like Matt and Micah and all of you in this room, that has been my prayer. So thank you, all of you. You are an answer to my prayers. And tonight I wanted to share a couple of thoughts with you that I thought might be a good way for us to reach out and kind of touch on some of these things that you've been working on as far as the journey to come, so to speak. I think you've had 3 or 4 emphases. And so one of those is what's coming next. And several years ago, in fact, it was like 23 years ago, we had a Bible study and we're sitting around having our dessert. And we had a guest speaker that night, and he was actually the head of our missions group at the church that I was part of. And he comes over to Frank and me, who were part of the group. And he looks me right in the eye and he says, "It's time for you to go." And I'm like, "Well, go home, go." I'm not sure what he was talking about. And he looks at Frank and he says, "And Frank, it's time for you to go." Well, you guys are all pretty close. In the next, at maximum, probably 4 or 5 years, you're going to be going somewhere. He had in mind for us that we helped to send a lot of people on mission trips. And we were not really enthused about going ourselves. And so he just came to us and said, "Well, it's time for you to go." Well, we didn't take it that seriously. But then the next time we got together, we sort of prayed and said, "You know what? Maybe he's right." But, where's a stockbroker and a football coach going to go and do missions? And the only thing that came up was there was this basketball coach in Mombasa, Kenya, who was just dying to have a team come over and do some mission work in Mombasa, Kenya. Has anybody ever heard of Mombasa, Kenya? Anybody know where it is? Well, it's a predominantly Muslim city on the coast in Kenya. And it's a place I had never heard of. I had never imagined going there. And the one thing I will tell you is if you decide to take the Lord up on that challenge it's time to go, be prepared for the most unexpected, the most unusual things to happen to you. Because when you're in the right place, following God's calling, there's going to be all kinds of challenges that you never expected. It's called spiritual warfare. It's not a secret, but it happens because Satan doesn't really want you to be that effective. And if you're willing to sell out and you're willing to take your Christian faith and move from where you are to taking, sharing it and trying to do something for the gospel, you're going to be challenged at that. There are going to be roadblocks. There's going to be obstacles get thrown in front of you. So just a warning that if you do take this challenge like we did, your witness is being felt everywhere already, 24/7. And I wanted you to think tonight a little bit about remembering the history of FCA and your legacy now in relationship to some of the heroes that I'm going to remind you of, talk about a little bit tonight. We're going to share a little bit about some of what those people have done and why we stand on their shoulders. I would ask you tonight, who are some of your heroes? And who are the athletes that have been used to sell everything that you can imagine? Just think of all the people who have been marketed through athletics and through sports. In the founding of this organization that you're sitting in on tonight, the FCA group, there were, at that point in time, they used to have a lot of the star athletes were selling cigarettes, because you could advertise tobacco on all kinds of media. So the idea that one of the original founders said, well, if we can use athletes to sell cigarettes, we can at least try and harness athletes to let them share their faith. And he was a little crass by saying selling Jesus Christ. But this was Branch Rickey, and we'll talk about Branch in a little bit. Has anybody ever heard of the name Branch Rickey? Well, I'll tell you why. I'm going to have you, that's your part of your homework. The founder, one of the founders of the Fellowship of Christian Athletes is Branch Rickey. And I'll tell you why it's an important, why he's an important character for us. So what is your calling is also a really, really important aspect of this whole challenge that I was facing, we were facing at the time. And one of the things that jumped out at me when I thought about this in relationship to you guys was this whole idea of you're planning a whole lot of stuff in the next several years. And the question is, where are you going to end up? What is your calling? Have you thought about the fact that you've been given talents in a unique way, and that you have heroes, that you have people that you admire and that you want to be like and that you want to maybe emulate? And is that really what God wants you to do? You see, God has this plan for your life. And we'll talk a little bit again about, the idea that Christians, we sort of feel like Christians get defined in a way when you define yourself and say, you know what? It's time for me to become a Christian. And we'll talk about that in Romans 10, 9, and 10. If you're familiar with those two verses, we're going to talk about those tonight. But one of the things that we have been really overemphasized enough is this idea of calling. Usually it's like somebody has the idea that, well, what's going to pay me the most? What job can I make the most money at? Or where am I going to be able to maybe find something that I'll really, be in a powerful situation? So for your next steps in life, and if you feel like it's time for you to go, you're ready to go out into the real world, I would just give you a couple of themes. The first theme is home is where God calls us. Your job, or where your home is, where you're going to be living, working, doing things, if you are really home is where God calls us to be. If you're any place else, you're going to have frustrations. If you're any place else, you're going to be thinking, well, what's my next job? What's my next spot? Where can I go next? Because you'll never be satisfied if you don't ask the Lord to help you find your landing spot. It's called a calling. Now, oftentimes this is associated with somebody who's maybe a pastor or a preacher or a priest or someone who's called into the ministry. Every one of us are called. Every one of us have a calling if we just seek it. It's like we've got this God who created the universe. He's got a plan for you. And it's like, I don't know if I want to check in on that. I'm just going to run it on my own for a while. I'll see how that works. I will tell you, I've tried it. We'll all try it. You'll try it. We'll all try it. It doesn't work as well as when you get plugged in and ask for God's help in that calling. Because when you're truly home, it is when you are in God's calling. And so if you want to do some things that are thinking about what your next steps in life are all going to be about, think about your home being where God calls you. Has anybody ever heard of Scotty Scheffler? Anybody in the room? You recognize that golf swing? This is one of my heroes. I don't know, if you've never played golf, you have no idea how daunting that picture is. If you're standing on the 18th hole of the Masters golf tournament, and you've got to hit a little tiny ball 300 yards between those trees. Think about that. How many of you have tried to hit a golf ball? How many of you think you can put it 300 yards out there between those trees? One guy. Yeah. I'm telling you, if I had a cannon, I couldn't do that. I'd probably still be too nervous. I'd probably still hit one of those pine trees. And he does it regularly. But you know what the most impressive thing about Scotty Scheffler is? It's the way he lives his life. Have any of you heard him talk about his testimony? Is this guy something else? I mean, this is your generation. This is could be one of your heroes. This is a guy who's 25 or 26. I don't know. I'm sure he's not 30. And he's just, he's so down to earth in terms of how he approaches and shares his faith. This guy isn't going to knock you over with scripture. He's not going to knock you over with piety. But I'll tell you one thing, he will knock you over with the way he lives his life and the way he conducts himself on the golf course. So again, nobody's perfect. We're not trying to pretend that there is anybody that's perfect. But I will say this, we have so many heroes in our lives. We have coaches who we've sometimes, maybe we think they're heroes, sometimes we don't. We get enough playing time, we think they're heroes, right? If we don't get enough playing time, then we have another name for those guys. But all of these guys who are dedicated to making you good athletes, I have a great deal of respect for. I've been on both sides. I've been both an athlete and I've been a coach. I know how difficult it is. I've also met your parents, not your parents, but I've met your parents. And they're not all easy to get along with, are they? Especially if you're not getting playing time. Coaching is not easy. And when they're sold out to be a Christian coach on top of it, that's a special calling. That's a special person that can do that. If you're going to be a coach, I would just tell you, Tom, you think it's a good idea that they might be a Christian coach? Might be helpful on Saturday morning after Friday night when the calls start coming in from the parents, when all of the pressures start coming in from boosters, when all the other pressures tell you that just like Scotty Scheffler on the morning of the Masters on the final round said, you know what, my identity isn't going to be determined by whether or not I win this golf tournament today. And your identity shouldn't be determined by whether or not you win that football game for your high school, your college, whatever team you're representing. Your identity is in the Lord. Your identity is in Christ. He can give you an identity that has absolutely nothing to do with anything in this world that's worth more than anything that this world has to offer. And so you're going on the journey. You're going to be leaving soon. All of the opportunities that are out there, I would just tell you, the opportunities to do that as a Christian are just unparalleled. I can tell you from Wall Street, there is no greater pressure than every month wondering whether or not they're going to come down with an axe and tell you to maybe consider getting another job in another industry because you're not as good as we thought you were. So you go to Goldman Sachs thinking it's great. You go to Merrill Lynch thinking it's great. You go to another Wall Street firm, Morgan Stanley, all of them, they're so competitive. And by the time you get there and you decide, well, how am I going to do this? How am I going to handle this as a Christian? Well, first of all, separate your identity from all that production at the end of the month. Separate that identity from results. That's the world's crap. That has nothing to do with anything that the Bible promises us about real life. And so the whole thought of next generation is think about some of your heroes. And so that's why I wanted to share with you a few of these other thoughts. Coaches, as I said, and teachers, and you know what? Teammates. I have so many heroes. And when I think back on the teams that I've been on, and guys who, you know, they weren't the best athletes. They weren't the high scorers. They weren't the guys who were scoring all the touchdowns. They were blocking. They were oftentimes doing tackling that nobody else wanted to do. They were coming up, meeting that running back. you know, instead of standing back waiting for somebody else to make the linebacker do all the tackling. All of these things, when you have a teammate that you know is valuable, they can be your heroes also, or you can be that hero by being the best that you can be. And so I love the idea of teammates being some of our heroes. Well, here's some 4 people that I wanted to share with you. I mentioned Branch Rickey. Have you rethought at all about who Branch Rickey is? Any thoughts? Anybody remember anything that he did that might stand out in your mind? Has anybody ever heard of Jackie Robinson? You know who Jackie Robinson is? What was the relationship between Branch Rickey and Jackie Robinson? Anybody know? Well, without Branch Rickey, there would not have been a Jackie Robinson. There wouldn't have been a Jackie Robinson story. Because at that point in time, our racial relationships were so negative, you couldn't possibly think of a black man being able to play Major League Baseball. It was impossible. Branch Rickey, a white general manager whose mother made him memorize scripture verses, who went to Sunday school, who was a Christian, sort of a traditional Christian, sort of a tough, rough, cigar smoking, occasionally whiskey drinking Christian, who maybe I wouldn't qualify in the same way, or I wouldn't like the lifestyle in the same way, but here's a guy who made an incredible decision. He said, you know what? Enough of this racism. I happen to be, Branch Rickey said, I happen to be the general manager for the Brooklyn Dodgers. The Brooklyn Dodgers had the ability to sign a black player, send him to Montreal, give him enough time to grow up in the minor leagues, and then have the courage to bring him to the major leagues. If you've never seen the Jackie Robinson story, I urge you, go back and watch it and look for Branch Rickey. Branch Rickey was the general manager. He also was one of the founders of the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. And a guy named Don McClannon, who was a pastor from Oklahoma, tried to get somebody of authority to validate this whole idea of FCA. And he went to see Branch Rickey like, I don't know, maybe 3, 4, 5 times. And Branch Rickey wouldn't see him. He didn't want to see some hokey pastor from down south, and he didn't know anything about him. He was a pretty rough, tough guy, this guy, Branch Rickey was. But eventually, he just kept hanging out in Branch Rickey's office, and he'd see him go out the door, in the door, and Branch Rickey would notice him, but he wouldn't say a word to him. 3 days later, after he sat there in his office for 3 days, hoping to have an audience with Branch Rickey says, I know you've been here wanting to see me. What do you got? And so he goes, he says, you got 5 minutes. 5 hours later, Branch Rickey is so convinced that this idea has merit that you're here tonight because of Branch Rickey. So when you're out there on your journey, when you're out there and when you leave and when you go, wherever it is, be that person. Like, remember Branch Rickey. There'll be a time where you have an opportunity to do the right thing on a very, very tough subject. It may not be racial relationships. You may not get to do a Jackie Robinson, whatever, but it's going to be significant to somebody, because somebody is going to be in a position where they're going to be treated very, very poorly if you don't give them an opportunity to be treated better. Remember Branch Rickey, because he gave you the idea that even when you're in a position of authority, you can be doing things as a Christian that will make a difference for a lot of people. The next person is Oliver. Now, Oliver, I don't expect you to know who this is, but I mentioned a little bit to Ty today, and I mentioned also to Jackie. I was describing on that first mission trip that we ended up going to Mombasa, Kenya on, the very first team that I went to be the coach of. We went to this school And the kids came out that we were playing against, and they were just a ragtag bunch of kids. They were just terrible. And we thought this is going to be a joke. And they said, well, wait till Oliver shows up. And so whoa, Oliver, who's Oliver? And so all of a sudden, this guy looks like he's chiseled, like came from just nowhere. He didn't look like any of the other kids. And he comes out and all the kids start cheering for Oliver. And the kids have been warming up, and so Oliver comes out and he does through the layup lines. Well, Oliver doesn't do layups. He does dunks. He does right hand and left hand. And we're like, whoa, we got Oliver to deal with today. So it turns out that's all Oliver could do. And at the end of the first quarter, it's 18-0. Oliver hadn't been able to dunk on us because I said, well, I don't know about these other guys, but we're going to double Oliver. That's for sure. And so Oliver never got to the basket, so he couldn't dunk. And we saw him shoot 3 times, and he never hit the rim on any of the 3. So he couldn't shoot from outside. But we also learned a lesson that when you're on a mission trip, you don't want to win by 18-0, and you don't want to lose by 18-0. You want to be credible. So by the end of the regular game, which we stopped at the end of 3 quarters, leading like 72-18, after I told them, don't intercept any more passes, don't block any more shots, don't do anything that you would normally do. We just stopped and we chose sides. And Oliver got to play with some of our guys, and some of our guys got to play with these other kids from Kenya. And we had 2 more quarters of basketball that was just fun. Oliver never forgot that. The next night, we're at another high school. Guess who is in the crowd watching? Oliver's there. And now Oliver's listening to our testimonies the same way you're listening to a testimony tonight. And Oliver's like, he comes up to some of our kids. He really liked 2 of our players, especially. He said, I've never heard anybody talk about Christianity like that. And so he said, well, you can claim this. Romans 10:9-10, you can claim it. If you say it with your mouth and you believe it in your heart, then you can become a Christian. And so Oliver's just not quite sure. So we go venue after venue after venue. We're in Kenya. We're in Mombasa, Kenya. It's the last night. And just before the start of the last game, Oliver shows up again. And our captain goes over and witnesses to him one more time, and Oliver's just not quite ready. So we get on the plane and we're flying home. And this is 2001. This is June of 2001. My first overseas mission trip of any kind. All of us on the plane are talking about, we're coming back next year. We're going to find Oliver. We're going to see what's going on with Oliver next year, right? Does anybody remember what happened in September of 2001? You know what? We were never allowed to put a team back on the field to go back to Mombasa, Kenya. I don't know what happened to Oliver, but there's some Olivers in all of our lives. I've met a lot more Olivers ever since that night or since that trip. And the guys, some of them, men and women who are real close. They want to accept Christ. They're really good friends. They're great people, but they're not quite convinced on this Christian thing. They're not quite there yet. And that's legit. Let them be legit. Let them have that, because we were all there at one time. And if you're there, then understand that until you feel the calling of the Holy Spirit in your own life, you won't be able to accept the Lord either. But that night we learned you don't always get to go back. If you have a chance to share the gospel with Oliver, share it now. Share it tonight. Share it when you can, because you don't always get a second chance. So Oliver's the next guy. Well, Scotty Scheffler is on here. We talked a little bit about him. I won't go into more detail other than to say, I love this guy so much because I'm a golfer, and I realize how incredible this guy's talent is, number one. And then to be so casual, it's no big deal, To be the way he is, I just love it. So if you haven't looked up Scotty Scheffler, look up his testimony, look up who he's all about. Another homework assignment. I love Dawn Staley. Who's Dawn? Anybody recognize who Dawn Staley is?
South Carolina.
The women's basketball coach from South Carolina. Won 2 of the last 3 women's national NCAA championships. She may not be the classic Baptist preacher. She may not be the person that you would normally think of that we might be. I'm not trying to promote her as perfect any more than I would promote you or me as perfect. What I love about Dawn Staley is she talks about her faith openly, even though she is so searching herself in a really difficult way. She doesn't know what to do with transgender athletes. They try to pin her down and she won't, like, you know what? She loves people no matter what their situation is. And she's not going to throw a transgender athlete under the bus just because somebody wants a quick answer. There's a lot of people out there who have a heart that is still working on developing a lot of different answers to some of these tough questions. You guys live in a difficult time. It was a black and white thing when Tom and I grew up. Well, when I grew up, maybe Tom's a lot younger than I am, but you know, the older people in this room, you can identify a little bit with how much easier it was than it is for all of you. You have a much more difficult environment in which to declare your faith. It's more open. You can do it probably more easily than some of us could, but it's much more challenging. There are many more difficulties in terms of expressing your faith, being able to talk about biblical things without being called haters. Because there's one problem with the Bible. The Bible still does declare itself in ways that are uncompromising. There are some places in the Bible where Jesus said, you know what? I'm the only way to get to God. That's a toughie. That might not go over real well in every circle that you're going to be involved in. It might not go over very well if you're teaching in a public school. But you know what? You do have the ability to express your faith in the right way. And that's why I put Dawn Staley on here. Dawn Staley said to a reporter, well, if you don't understand anything about somebody that's the creator of the universe, then I feel sorry for you. Because if you can't understand something beyond your own ability to just comprehend things, then you haven't really encountered God. You probably haven't encountered somebody that's really challenging. And so I would just say to you again, you'll find some of your heroes that you can go with, and you'll find some of these challenging. And I've given you a little bit of a homework assignment to say, check on Branch Rickey, check on Scotty Scheffler, and check on Dawn Staley. So what can we do in Ithaca, New York? What can we do wherever you're called to? Well, helping with local teams and starting FCA huddles, that's probably, you know, we're advertising maybe for FCA tonight, but you can do that with Young Life. You can do it with a lot of different Christian organizations. But if you're going to be a witness, and if you're going to have character, and if you're going to stand up for what you believe, then be willing to do some things about it. Be willing to share that with others. Don't be willing to only hold it in for yourself. Don't be thinking, hey, I got it. I'm going to eternity. The rest of you guys are all going to hell. No, that's not where we're at. What we're at this point is we need to bring more people with us. We need to have a love in our heart for people rather than trying to be divisive. And so even if you are telling people, yes, I think Jesus is very important. I think Jesus can make a difference in your life. That doesn't preclude you from just loving on them if they say, well, no, I'm not ready. It doesn't preclude you from still having enough love to say, you know what? I understand. You're not quite ready. You're not quite there. And maybe you'll never get there. I don't know. All my job is as a Christian is to share the faith that God has given me. I can't help but talk about what's going on. Sharing your witness in schools, holding sports camps for local kids. How many of you have gotten involved in some of this? Is this going on in Ithaca? I don't know. Are you doing some of this stuff? Tell me about any of these you see that make sense. Have you been able to do things in local high schools? Yeah, Micah?
Yeah, we've had multiple times groups that have driven middle school. We talked to the driving Bible with them.
Great. Well, don't stop doing it when you leave Ithaca. You know, when you get a chance, wherever the Lord places you, that's your opportunity to be a person of character. This is not a list that's limited, obviously. These were just some ideas we're throwing out. Let your imagination run away with itself. The whole idea for me is that we want to try and be that missing piece of the puzzle. We want to just keep saying to each one of you that the special place that you have and the special place that the Lord has, the plan that the Lord has for your life is so unique that unless you're in fellowship, unless you're trying to read the word, unless you're having people around you that also can help you to get through that sort of thing, you're probably just relying on the world. You're probably having a lot more reliance on what the world's values are than what your Christian values are. So think about maybe trying to, and not that those are all wrong, but I think it's very important that you do have this piece of the puzzle. I want to close tonight, and then I'll open it up if you have questions or you want to ask me anything from Merrill Lynch to going on mission trips, anything you want to ask. What was Ty like when he was a baby? I'll answer all those questions. Whoops. But I thought if we all, can everybody see that? Sir. I would like to ask if you would pray this prayer with me. It's from Ephesians 3, and it's verses 16 to 19. I pray that out of his glorious riches, he may strengthen you with power through his Spirit in your inner being, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith. And I pray that you, being rooted and established in love, may have power together with all the Lord's people to grasp how wide, long, and high, and deep is the love of Christ, and to know this love that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled with the measure of all the fullness of God. Thank you, everybody, for letting me share.
Thank you, Mr. Wells. We really appreciate you.